thanks so much, Antonio, for having me, and Tom for allowing me to kind of be here. This is an honor to just come back to school and to speak with you guys and give you guys a little bit of a preview of my experience thus far as a professional and kind of give you a glimpse of where I started. My name's John, and I guess there's no real title for today's talk. It's more just, I guess the theme of it is just to kind of take you through my journey and show you, the steps of like how I got there, but also some of the obstacles that I faced as well, and hopefully you guys get some inspiration out of it, and if not, at least it gets to show you a little bit of my work before I became professional, right? So I'm actually a Bay Area native. I grew up here in the East Bay, actually in Richmond. Grew up, born and raised, went to high school right here in the Bay Area. And just a little bit about me, I was a kid who enjoyed sports, but also art. So I played basketball in high school for the school team. I played baseball, and I was really into drawing, like sci-fi stuff, robots, tanks, and stuff like that. And I also was one of those kids who collected sneakers. So I was like a sneakerhead back then. So I know that the sneaker culture has changed a lot. But back in those days, I would be camping out at Foot Locker and Finish Line, at 4 a.m. and like running across the line to go pick up, fresh Jordans, basically. So that's kind of a little bit about me growing up here. Currently, I guess if you were to define what I am, I guess I'm a couple things, but I guess the easiest way to say it is I'm an industrial designer and I'm also an entrepreneur. So through these slides, I'll kind of take you guys through a little bit of my journey before Academy of Art, and then we'll kind of get into Academy of Art as well. So like I said before design school, I love to draw. And so eventually after high school, I actually took AP Art in high school and failed the AP class. So no art school really wanted me at the time. Like my stuff wasn't really that good. So I just decided to go to a liberal arts college, UC Irvine in Southern California. And I was undeclared at the time. And then eventually I just decided I like drawing and stuff, drawing and painting. I'll just become a studio art major at UCI. And the image you see on the right was just some of it's funny because while everyone else was doing like nude drawings and kind of like urinals upside down and stuff like that, I was drawing shoes and basically just weird stuff. Everyone looked at me like I was kind of weird with all these like fine artists, right? So I just have a little bit of a preview of some of that stuff up there. Here's some of the artwork I kind of did at UC Irvine. So did a lot of painting. I would paint on shoes. I would take Dunks and Jordans and stuff and just draw Godzilla, stuff that I like, pop culture stuff that I like on it. I was from the Bay Area in NorCal, and like I had a lot of SoCal friends, but I would just kind of like draw stuff like the Bay Bridge, the old Bay Bridge before like as you see it now, and just like photoreal type stuff. And towards, I would say, my middle of my senior year, I was like, man, I'm about to graduate, and I have no idea what I'm going to do to make money. And I didn't want to be that starving artist. And so I kind of just started to do some research, and I obviously wanted to pursue like a career that I loved. And so I started to look at sneakers, and I collected Jordans and stuff. So I was like, well, who designs Jordans? Like, what kind of profession is that? And I discovered Tinker Hatfield, who was an industrial designer. So that key word kind of like stuck in my mind. And I had just started like Googling it, found Core 77, eventually found out that there was industrial design classes at this place called Pasadena, which was about 2 hours from UC Irvine. So I started to enroll in those classes while finishing up my bachelor's degree at UC Irvine. So simultaneously, some of the stuff you see on the left side, I was taking an intro to product design and transportation design class at Art Center at night. So basically, I would finish my lectures at UCI and then drive like a 3-hour commute stuck in traffic on the 605, and then come back like past midnight basically and do homework from both ends. It was kind of grueling, but I was really enjoying it. A little bit of my other education was networking and being part of that fraternity life. So I was part of a fraternity called Zeta Phi Rho at UC Irvine. It was like a multicultural fraternity. And the reason I'm kind of showing you guys this is I got a lot of that partying out of my system during my first undergrad. So yeah, like I wasn't really focused on career at the time. I was just literally going through the motions of going through class. And I would just party a lot, really. But I think a lot of that helped me kind of learn like networking skills with different types of people. And that kind of will come into play later because a lot of these people eventually have helped kind of build the career I have now. So eventually I graduated UC Irvine. I was planning to go to Art Center actually in Pasadena. But then the minute my parents came down to see me walk, my mom basically sat me down and told me that she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so she needed to go through chemo and a bunch of stuff. And so I just decided it was probably best for me to find a school that was a little closer to home. So I decided to go to Academy of Art. And actually, it was probably one of the best things I think a decision that I could have made. Because not only was I now close to my mom, eventually, the Bay Area is probably one of the best places for product design. And at the time, I didn't know that was going to be my major, but it just worked out really well. So yeah, I ended up enrolling at Academy of Art. It was honestly like my dream education. I think like I didn't view any of this as work. It was just so fun to me. And so I can kind of take you guys through some of my projects. But it's important to note, like, I definitely wasn't like the most talented, naturally talented student. There was a bunch of my classmates that were a lot more talented than me, but I just knew like I wanted to outwork them. Mostly that was just like my attitude that I could really work hard. But I'll walk you through some of my classes and some of the struggles I had in school. So yeah, like when I first came to Academy of Art, I was looking through the pamphlets and I saw all the scale model cars and I was like, man, that looks really cool. Like forget shoe design, like I just want to try to do some transportation design. And ironically, that's actually how I met Antonio. So I enrolled in PD1 and transportation design in the same semester, which was not a good decision on my part. But yeah, here's some of the cars I tried to sketch, and I kind of realized fairly shortly after like a week or two that, yeah, I just wasn't cut out I just wasn't as good as the classmates around me. They were just so good at sketching cars, but I did give it a shot. But I think, me dropping out of that and kind of focusing on product kind of led me to like what was more of a natural fit for me. So here's me in product design 1. So I think this was maybe my second semester at Academy. I did skip a few liberal arts classes because I had already graduated with a bachelor's degree, so I was able to kind of accelerate the program a little bit. So here in Product Design 1, the teacher was Chris Myers, and the prompt was to design a gaming controller. And while all my classmates were coming up with these hand ergonomic gaming controllers for their final project, I was like, man, like I don't want to do that. Like I want to do something completely different. So of course, I decided to ask the teacher. Well, I didn't ask. I just showed up, the next day with the assignment that I had an EEG or brain-controlled game controller. So completely different. And I just remember Chris looking at me and was like, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And I was like, "Yeah, like, it's fine." But anyway, yeah, I was just that type of student where I just wanted to kind of challenge myself and kind of go against the grain a little bit. And when I entered Academy of Art, I kind of knew I was a little bit older, so I kind of felt like I already had a little bit of a challenge, right? Like I didn't feel as young, so I was like, man, this is my only shot. Like I'm already older, I gotta make sure that I get a job afterwards. So basically, my attitude with every class was everything that I did, I wanted to make sure that I stood out in case like, internship opportunities were gonna come. I wanted to make sure that I stood out compared to my classmates. And that was just kind of the attitude that I had. And so this was kind of the model for the PD1. It was called We Think, or that's what I called it. So at the time, we, the the system. Now I know there's like Nintendo Switch, but this was kind of the popular system at the time. And it was basically a system designed for elderly people to kind of help them with Alzheimer's, because you could find that some research showed basically that with some concentration and exercise with their brain, it essentially kind of helped prevent them from getting Alzheimer's. So that was this project. And you could see back then I wore like a tie and stuff for presentations. I was like really trying to be professional, and then now like I just don't care. Like it's just and so PD1 was fun. I was like, yeah, like did that, like did something completely different. I felt really good about myself. And then of course Ted comes into our final class with Joe Perez, and he's like, so I'm going to give you guys some homework over break. And I was like, whoa, like homework? I didn't know that we get homework over when I'm not enrolled in class. But honestly, this was like actually one of the really defining moments, I think, class-wise for me here at Academy as well. It was probably one of the hardest classes that I took at the time, just getting into it. Learned a lot about professionalism, teamwork, and this project basically was a water purifier aimed to, at the time, I don't know if you guys remember, there was an earthquake in Haiti. And so we were basically trying to figure out water solutions for third world countries that were inexpensive enough but could be produced at like on a mass scale. And so this was kind of this portable water container that had renewable energy by rolling to utilize UV light to purify the water. A really fun project. I don't even know how we pulled off the models, but yeah, it was really fun. And then PD3, the projects just kept getting larger. So during this stage, I had actually just come back from an internship, and quite honestly, I think that internship just ruined me. Like, I had seen students from other schools. I'd seen like professional designers, like what was being output and kind of like what was expected of me. So I think I feel really bad for the teacher at the time. Like I would question everything. I would literally not follow any directions. I would, he would say sketch on one piece of paper, and I would just do a bunch and just like put them on the wall and stuff like that. But I think it still was a really fun class. Basically, it was a project aimed at three different modes of the day: morning, afternoon, and nighttime. And so this was basically a transformable volleyball net that you could use in the daytime. You could bring it to the beach, set it up as a hammock, or also at night project onto the volleyball hoop. So the volleyball net. Really conceptual, high-level blue sky thinking. And I think like that's the real cool part about Academy of Art. It really got your brain to be free, really, because like once you become a professional, everyone's like bugging you about costs and costs of goods and how are you going to make it and stuff like that. And it just really kind of, you'll see when you guys get out that you just don't have that luxury of free thinking anymore as much. And this will kind of play into like my path later. And then after PD3, I think I was just jaded from product for a while, and I was like, I just want to try something else. And so luckily Academy of Art had toy design, and I had a few friends who were also in product with me. I was like, hey, how about we like skip product this semester and let's just all enroll in toy design together. And so we did. It was a really fun class. Like the thinking was completely different, and we just had a lot of fun creating toys and just thinking about a different user group. So this was my toy design final, Stegogogo, basically a toy dinosaur that you could kind of program using these different balls. So according to the different order that you would place the balls, he would basically make different kind of motions. That was a lot of the stuff that happened in school, and ironically, one of my PD1, that brain controller project, the one that I said like I just didn't follow the directions really, that one actually led me to another former alumni of Academy at the time, who was the creative director at NeuroSky, So they actually make brain controllers. And he actually came to our final. And shortly after that final, I got an email from him that basically said like, hey, we're looking for an intern. Do you want to take it? So of course I did. So I did start to take some internships while I was in school. So my first one was right after PD1. So that was NeuroSky. Yeah, so lucky enough that my teacher knew the former alumni and invited him to the final. And basically that internship was really fun. It got my first taste of like what it was like to work professionally. It was great. We did a lot of high conceptual type stuff, but also I got to learn a little bit about like manufacturing and you know, how design actually gets made into real manufacturable products. And just, it was really cool because the user testing was like me putting on basically like stuff I was doing in my final, but it was like actually real and done by professionals. So that was just really cool. And they're right over here in San Jose. And so I don't know if you guys are Comic-Con geeks like I am, but there's this thing called Nekomimi, which was like these cat ears. And they're basically controlled by that sensor. And so I worked on that among a few other things there while I was interning. And then like PD2, right? Like I kind of talked a little about PD2. After passing Ted and Joe's class, I think like everyone in that class had like a certain high level of confidence because we had just passed like a class that was probably the hardest thing we've ever done in, up until that point in terms of school. And I just decided, hey man, like I'm just gonna go and apply to some internships and let's just see what happens. So I saw actually an ad for Whipsaw, and they were looking for a third or fourth year about to graduate or recently graduated students for an internship here in San Jose. And of course, like I was not a third year or a fourth year, like I was below that. Like I'd only taken PD1 and PD2, but I was like, man, like whatever, let's just try it. So of course I applied, and luckily I got an interview. And so I got a phone interview, and then they called me back for an in-person. And when I went in for the in-person, the person who had talked to me on the phone was like, hey, like really cool stuff, like really, I was like, oh, this is awesome, like they actually like my stuff. And then he's like, let me bring in Dan Harden though. And then of course Dan Harden comes in, and he looks at my stuff, doesn't smile or anything. And he's like, what year are you? And then I was like, oh, like technically I guess you could say I'm a second year. And then he's like, yeah, we're only looking for third and fourth years. And he basically pointed out where I could improve on my portfolio. Basically pointed out like, yeah, you need to improve your sketching, you need to improve your aesthetics, all that kind of stuff. So I was like, oh, okay, I guess he's just giving me some good feedback and send me on my way. So I left that basically feeling like, all right, well, at least I tried. And then after winter break, they called me and offered me an internship. So I was like super surprised. And yeah, it was probably the hardest internship I had in my internship stints that I had. I remember my first day there, I didn't eat lunch and I didn't leave until like 3 or 4 a.m. And the reason was they had me, my first day, they had me carbon foam for like all the designers, basically like foam model, ergonomic models for them. And I remember I was like doing pretty good. And then I had like one last model to finish, but for some reason it was just taking longer, probably because I hadn't eaten anything. And then around like 9 o'clock, I don't know, Dan was still there. He worked really late too. He comes in to check on me. He's like, how's everything going? It's like, pretty good. He's like, let me see your model. So I showed it to him, and he basically pulls out these calipers, and I was getting kind of nervous, and he pulls out the calipers and measures it, and he's like, yeah, it's a millimeter off. And I was like, oh. And I just look at him, he's like, yeah, it's a millimeter off. And I was like, oh, I can just Bondo it, right? You know, because like, that's what we do at school, right? We Bondo our models. And he's like, nope, you got to redo it. Actually, make 3 of those. So I was like, oh man. So basically, I ended up staying till like 3 a.m. Basically doing that. But I think the reason I'm telling you that story from that first day was I actually got a really, really great education from him. I would eat lunch with him, and I learned so much just from like working late and spending those extra hours, and the fact that he would spend time kind of like mentoring me during that time. And a lot of the designers did there too. I just felt like there's just a lot of stuff you get out of the extra hours that you put in. You literally get what you put in. So yeah, I actually had a router that I worked on for TP-Link that actually made it to production when I was at Whipsaw, amongst like a bunch of other stuff, really cool brands that I got to work on. And yeah, I can get into a little more, but a lot of the designers I had worked with, eventually I still keep in touch with now. Some of them became design directors at Minimal in Chicago. Some of them own their own consultancies, and some of them are still, you know, at Whipsaw currently right now. So I keep in touch with them pretty frequently. Yeah, so after that, I think I went back to school, did PD3, and then just kind of like realized like, man, I want more work experience. I just felt like I got so much out of it that I wanted more. And so I decided to see if I could talk to Tom to see if I can get internship credit instead of taking more classes. So you'll notice I didn't take PD4, I didn't take PD5 or PD6 because basically I just kind of took time out of school and just decided to intern instead. And that internship was Y Studios. They were a smaller firm here in San Francisco. And the reason I had gotten that actually was there was a designer at Whipsaw. I would always stay late to kind of like watch him, how he would digitally sketch, basically how he would design. And I'd take him home to the train station because he basically would commute really late. And I got really close to him. And eventually when he knew I was going back to school, he was like, hey, I know this real cool place. They do real cool stuff with Chrome and like TiVo and stuff like that. Let me introduce you. So he basically introduced me to Y, who's the principal at Y Studios. And that's kind of how I got my internship at Y Studios. And worked on just really cool stuff there. And eventually they decided to give me a job offer in 2012, like right before I was going to graduate. So of course, like, you know, I was going to take it because that was my whole goal to come here. So I can kind of walk you through some of the professional designs that I ended up working on there. So some of them are, I mean, I worked on a ton of stuff there, but probably the more notable things that you guys probably see in the public are Sonos Play 1, that small little speaker. And then there's another one, Sonos Blue Note, which was a CMF version of that, done for the Grammys. And then Blue Gogi, a break-off of Guitar Hero, and I can get into that in a little bit. And then Skylander's Trap Team. I don't know if any of you have kids or younger cousins or siblings, but Skylanders was like real big a few years ago. And then Everyman Jack, a razor kind of shaving brand for men, sold at Target. So yeah, Sonos Play 1. I was fortunate enough, like right when I was hired, to be part of the design team that worked on Sonos. And now Sonos obviously has their own in-house design team now, but at the time they farmed it out. They basically hired out Y Studios to do all their stuff. So the Play 3, Play 5, the Sub, Play 1, the amp, all that stuff was done by Y Studios. And I was lucky enough to be able to work on Play 1. So here's just, you know, you guys can look at this on my website and stuff, but there's just some of the ideation that was going on in CAD for some of the surfacing. And obviously, like, nothing crazy, no crazy surfacing, but it's very simple. But just to think of surface detail, like how the radius and how the radii kind of, is there curvature continuity, right? It's not, is it just a regular fillet or is it an asymmetrical fillet? All that kind of stuff you guys probably learned in SOLIDWORKS. And at the time, they actually, all their whole design team, they worked in SOLIDWORKS. And so I was panicking because I had not taken SOLIDWORKS with Dave at the time yet. And so, yeah, I actually like came back to like take that class later, but I was basically doing this in Rhino. And then Blue Note, so basically there was a limited release of 200 of these that they were handing out to stars at the Grammys. Blue Note was basically commemorating it is a record label in the jazz, kind of like, they focus on jazz and blues, and basically when Sonos decided to hire on kind of their own team, they still needed to transition a little bit. They still hadn't built out their ID team, and so they needed Y Studios to kind of help transition and do that CMF portion for some of these special editions. So this was kind of the result of that. I actually have one at home. I wanted to bring it, but my wife wouldn't let me. So, but here's a picture of it. And then Blue Gogi was something I also worked on at Y Studios. If you guys remember Guitar Hero and like DDR and that kind of stuff, the two founders actually, after they sold the rights to Guitar Hero, they started another company called Blue Gogi. And basically it was a health and fitness brand. It's based in Austin, and essentially they tasked Y Studios to design universal gaming controllers that would wirelessly connect to your iPad. And you could bring that whole set and system to the gym. And it's kind of funny that now you see like Nintendo Switch and how you can kind of bring this portable system with you everywhere. But this was done like in 2013, I want to say. So it's kind of ahead of its time. It's really cool. They've built out, their company now. They have like treadmills and other kind of stuff like that. And then, like that toy design thing came in real handy because Y Studios, when they interviewed me, they noticed that I had that little dinosaur in my portfolio, and I think they already knew that they were going to get some kind of like toys and stuff like that, like fun stuff. So that really helped because soon enough, Activision came knocking on Y Studios' door, and the project was Skylanders Trap Team. And it's funny because at the time, some of my friends who had kids, they like love Skylanders. So I was able to kind of bring them to the Skylanders studio, Toys for Bob studio, where they got to meet the voices of these actual characters and meet the designers of the actual characters themselves. So we didn't actually design the monsters. We designed the portal, basically the hardware that plugs into the Xbox and the Wii and basically the gaming consoles. And so the focus here was to create something that was like RFID functionality wise that would work with the toys to bring the toys into the game. And so we had to build around a lot of this hardware, but also keep in mind the aesthetic that was getting involved, right? And so some of the projects that you saw before, it's like very streamlined consumer electronics based, but here I had to really get into that Game of Thrones mode of like rocks and like crystals and stuff like that, and sketch that. And you guys can see some of the ideation sketches of this on my own personal website. And then last from my studios, Everyman Jack. So I know Harry's is getting really popular now, but Target for a while was carrying a lot of EMJ or Everyman Jack. And so they were doing really well, and they came back to Y Studios to actually design an actual razor for them. So this is kind of the razor and its traveling case, and then the packaging that kind of goes with it. And so I was at Y Studios for about 3 years. My first job right out of Academy of Art, and I loved it, and I think it was probably like one of the best starts for my career. But obviously that was the only thing I had experienced, and I was getting to a point where I wanted to see what else was out there. I was serving a bunch of startups, right? Startups would come and hire the consultancy, and I was like wondering, because we would, they would do really well. They would either IPO or be acquired by Google, and I was wondering, man, what is this startup life, right? How are all these people basically becoming rich? And so, and so I wanted to kind of see what it would be like to work at a startup. And so, funny enough, I just kind of reached into I started to email people. And actually, I emailed Antonio. I was like, hey, do you know of any places kind of looking, startup places looking for, kind of like a mid-level designer? And so he was like, yeah, I actually know this guy named Greg. Let me just connect you guys. And sure enough, I ended up interviewing there, and they ended up hiring me. And so at Soul Republic, I worked a lot on a lot of R&D projects that never actually made it to market, and I can kind of get into it. It was a crazy experience because it was actually only an 8-month stint, and the reason is because they basically fired everyone. So I got there, everything seemed great, Steve Aoki, Calvin Harris, all that kind of stuff, and then all of a sudden I looked up and literally half my office was gone. And so it was a little bit crazy, but I can kind of get into what I designed and then kind of what happened. So, so the Relays Wireless was Soul Republic's first Bluetooth sports in-ear bud. So essentially, before you see kind of the true wireless right now, they still had to cord stuff, at least at the time when we were doing it. So these were kind of the result of that. It's pretty fun. The mint color that you see here was a 𝐂𝐸F version that we decided to release because there was a lot of, we kind of found through research there was a lot of females that were kind of in that fitness space at the time, and so this colorway does really well. Sold at Best Buy. And then what was really cool at the startup was that aside from just designing stuff, I was like around really talented graphic designers, engineers, marketing people. Before I was in a lot of these consultancies next to really talented industrial designers, but here I got kind of a taste of like what it was like to kind of work with other people that are outside my field. And in doing so, I got to do a little more than just design too. So I got to art direct some photo shoots and stuff. So I got to work with people like Michelle Maturo, who's like a hype beast model, Tyson Beckford, Manny Pacquiao's team came to our office. We got to design a program to release special 𝐂𝐸F colorways for Tiger Woods, the Lakers, stuff like that. So it was kind of like my first taste of like, designing cool stuff, but now designing and at a very high celebrity scale, if you will. So here's me with Tyson Beckford. This was a photo shoot done in LA, and basically the headphones that I designed, we wanted to pose it on him. I had to spray sweat on him, tell the photographer what shots I wanted, stuff like that. And then on the side, you can kind of see some of the research that went behind the ergonomics of developing the headphones, and then a lot of the prototypes on the bottom that we did to get to the final result. And all in all, this was like a really quick life cycle too for development. We got through this, we had like 1 month of design really, and then we got to like a prototype in like 5 months, and then 6 months I think they started to release stuff into production. So it was really quick. Here's some of the packaging. So I collaborated with the art director on the artwork, and then I kind of worked on the structure, and then he kind of did the artwork that was going to go in the box. And so let me tell you about some of the crazy stuff that was happening. So when I was there, great company. We were at the AMC on Van Ness right here. We had the whole floor. And when I first joined, it was like full of life and parties and beer pong on Fridays and stuff like that. And then 6 months in, the CEO made an announcement that basically they were laying off majority of the company. So everyone in Oregon, they were laying off. And then they essentially fired everyone in my office except for my team. So the only team that remained was the product development team. And the reason is I think there's just a lot of stuff going on at that management level. And so obviously, I was only 6 months there. I was like, man, was this the right decision to come here? And then my boss, the director, Greg, he quit too. And he started his own firm called Mast. And so he quit, and he actually wanted me to kind of come over with him, but I was like, I wasn't sure, and they still needed someone to kind of design some of the rest of the stuff there. So I was basically the only industrial designer left. So I became the lead there, and then I was also freelancing for him at night. So I was kind of working for my boss elsewhere, but also now basically taking his position. So it was kind of a funny thing. But through that, I met a lot of really cool people. One of which who eventually played a huge role in some of the startups that I'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah, I ended up kind of freelancing for Mast for a little bit. And we worked on this thing called Looped, which is basically a networking beacon wearable. So yeah, basically I would design some earphones in the day. I would go to Greg's house afterwards and then design some of this stuff. And yeah, it was really fun. And then Ink Studios too. I also, one of my friends, so that designer I told you guys about, who I would stay really late to take to the train station, he actually started his own firm as well called Ink Studios. And so you can kind of see I'm surrounded by a lot of these really talented designers who are starting their own things. So that kind of played a role into eventually what's happening now. So I did a little freelance for him as well. So obviously, you guys probably want to know what happened. So everyone left. I was the last designer there. Basically, people were quitting left and right, and I just decided like I was going to get married soon, and I probably needed a little more stability. So I started interviewing at places, and I interviewed at Fitbit, I interviewed at Smart Design, and one of those interviews that I got was like a dream opportunity, which was IDEO. So I went through several rounds of interviews with them, ended up going in person for an all day with them, went through like a whole bunch of things like in person, doing stuff with them, and I thought, like it went really well, thought I had it. And of course I had interviewed at a few other places too. But it turns out they said no. And so the reason I'm telling you guys this is like, it doesn't do you guys any justice for me to just paint this whole picture of like, hey, I did all this and it's been great. There was some rejections in there too. And so during this time, I took a trip with my wife to a friend's wedding. She was getting married in the Philippines. And we had a layover in Taiwan. And during that layover, one of my wife's relatives, we went there, and then I met someone there who basically was asking kind of like what my profession was. I told him I was an industrial designer, and turns out we kind of knew the same manufacturing people from my Seoul Republic job. And he was like, oh, that's really cool that you design consumer electronics. And then he's like, let me get your card. So of course I gave it to him. Didn't really know what he did. He just said he worked in wireless space. Just thought it was just kind of an acquaintance from this wedding thing. I think a week after I flew back, I got an email that just says, hey, lunch, from a guy named Robert J. Para. So of course I open it up, and then I basically say, like, who is this guy, Robert Para? Like, I'll Google him. And so I Googled him, and it turns out he was a 38-year-old billionaire who owns the Memphis Grizzlies and who also owns a public company called Ubiquity Networks. And so I was like, man, of course I'm going to have lunch with him for sure. So I ended up having that lunch. I was already kind of like heartbroken about the IDEO thing, but I went there anyway. I was like, I don't even know what Ubiquity is. I looked up their website. Their stuff looks, from a design standpoint, it looks like I could probably help them, but it just didn't seem, it didn't have that notoriety that you have as a student. You want to work for someone like that, right? But I love the NBA. I love the Warriors, and I was like, man, he owns a basketball team. Like, the least I can do is have lunch with him. So I did, and he kind of showed me what they were working on, and he said that he got my contact from the guy that I had given my card in Taiwan. So it was like kind of a weird kind of connection to how he found me. But essentially he gave me an offer on the spot that I couldn't refuse, and so of course I took it. And the offer basically was to build out an entire consumer division for Ubiquity, because before they're kind of a business-to-business model where they're kind of in the enterprise space, and they really wanted to start to get into places like Best Buy and kind of build out a channel for consumers. And so I was like, cool, that's all I used to work in anyway, so let's do it. And that was kind of my first, I guess, like experience in like managing teams and kind of working at a global scale with like a public company. And it was really different too, because I didn't have a VP that I had to report to. I didn't have like a director or a CTO or anything like that you would normally kind of expect. I worked directly for the CEO of this like 600-person company, which was really cool. And so like my office was next to his glass office. It's actually where I met my partner, my now partner, Mike. But basically I was put on this team called Special Projects. So super secretive at the time. We were basically assembled like the Avengers from all these different companies, from guys from Tesla, guys from Cisco, and basically like I was the design portion of it, and I was tasked to do any means necessary to like help build this program in. So some of the projects that I worked on there, the first one that I came into was Amplify, which was basically taking enterprise level Wi-Fi and kind of condensing it and putting it into a consumer-friendly product. So, they were doing stuff at an enterprise level, which was super powerful, and they're like, why not take that technology and like put it into, in your own home, basically, so that you can have Wi-Fi everywhere. And so I came into this project. They already had the design relatively mechanically engineered and done, but they've never, taken a look at it at a really detailed consumer level of like looking at flash lines, parting line tolerances, stuff like that. Stuff that, probably for an enterprise market, no one cares about that. But when it's going to be in your home, you do care. And so had to kind of look at that and then, kind of quality check and quality control that. Aside from that, I was tasked with figuring out, how to create a website, packaging experience, as well as Amazon channels and stuff like that. And I was just a designer at the time. Like I had I don't design websites, but I was given a budget to hire teams to do that. And so it was kind of my first experience to start to manage people. Didn't really know what I was doing very well, but learned very quickly through some help with some people who had done it and some mentors of mine. And so some of the screenshots you see on the left was an interactive website where I actually hired one of my dorm mates from UCI who runs a digital agency in Irvine. And he's done work with Google, YouTube, and Subaru and stuff like that. And I was like, dude, help me. I don't know who's going to help me build this website, but it's due in a month, so can you help me? So yeah, I ended up hiring him to do that. So you'll kind of see once you start working in industry, you start to keep in touch with your friends, and some of your friends end up being able to help you in a real professional way too. And then on the right was the packaging design. So internally, we had some package designers and graphic designers. And so I was basically tasked to kind of manage them and guide that out-of-box experience of what's it going to look like? What's going to be in the box? How is it going to be presented, and sizing and shipping and all that kind of stuff. And then the real, the really underlying reason why he really wanted to bring me on was he really wanted to get into Best Buy and the consumer space and build out kind of a vertical of more consumer-facing products, right? And so the CEO, he has a jet, so he would, fly back and forth wherever he has, I don't know, several places he goes around the world. But whenever he'd stop by the San Jose office, he would come and sit next to me, and we kind of brainstorm some ideas of potential road mapping of some projects. And I was really fortunate enough to be able to work that closely with him. And one of those projects was taking Unify, a camera, a program that was really successful in its own segment, and kind of reappropriating that technology and putting that into a wearable camera called Front Row. And so that idea, we were just bouncing ideas off each other, and he was like, yeah, what if, you're able to just wear the camera, but it's not like GoPro, it's you would go to music festivals like Coachella or broadcasts on things like Periscope and stuff like that. So kind of tasked me with building out that vision. So I worked with the special projects team to kind of build out what that interaction would be like first, before we even developed the product itself. And then once that was approved, we kind of built out a bunch of different, the vision for all these different products that would kind of fall within that line. And this was kind of one of the projects that we worked on. And that's actually where I met my business partner, Mike, who's sitting back there. So he was the mechanical engineer that was tasked with kind of figuring out a lot of the mechanisms and stuff behind it. So that's how we started to work together. And you can see, the Front Row is seen on people like Jamie Foxx and rappers and Instagram models and stuff like that. So it's pretty cool. And it makes up, don't quote me on it now because I think it's changed, but Front Row falls within a market segment for Ubiquity that makes up about $156 million of their revenue. So, and it's sold at Best Buy, I believe. So I think Ubiquity was a real career-changing opportunity for me because it was, it was this place that, from the design world, I don't think very many of us have even heard of it. And even when I was in school, I hadn't heard of it. But it really gave me access to a lot of people that I wouldn't have otherwise probably have talked to or been in contact with. And so when I was working for him, got really close to the CEO. He owns a basketball team. And he was like, one of these days, I think it was a Friday, he came into my office and he was like, hey, good job on the camera thing. Do you think you would have some time over the weekend to help my friend out with something? And I was like, sure, who's your friend? And he's like, oh, a guy named Durwood. And it turns out Durwood was an NBA scout for Memphis Grizzlies trying to start his own startup as well. And he wanted some help to do this product called Elite Defender. And so basically on that Saturday, I showed up to this meeting spot with Durwood, and we basically banged out a design in one day, which I eventually helped him brand, package, do the website, organize the photo shoot, all that kind of stuff to basically get this product to market. And you can see here, if any of you guys follow basketball, that's Zaza Pachulia when he was on the Warriors. But the Warriors have it, several professional players have it, colleges have it, and it's basically an offensive training equipment for basketball players to learn how to take contact when they're going towards the hoop. And yeah, like just through that network, through that CEO, I just feel so blessed that he was able to kind of introduce me to some of these people, because you are who you surround yourself with, right? And it was kind of my first glimpse of like being around celebrities, but shaking hands with them and sitting next to them and talking to them. And so with Elite Defender, I got to hang out with like Aaron Gordon, who was like almost the dunk champion several years back, plays on Orlando Magic. And then other days I'd be in my office, and then Robert, the CEO, would come in and be like, "Hey guys, here's my friend Rick Fox," right? Like sits down next to me and starts talking about like esports and stuff like that. So it was kind of like around that time I just was around these people, and I got this itch of like, man, like how are all these people so successful doing these jobs that before I kind of thought were like very hard to achieve. And so I don't know if any of you guys have seen Endgame yet, and I'm not going to ruin it for you, but like I was looking at all these people, these NBA stars, these entrepreneurs, this billionaire CEO, and I would say like the odds of them getting from point A to point Z to their success was like 1 to like 14 million, probably something like that, right? And then for me, like I was just like, man, why not? Like it kind of had that itch, and I kind of wanted to do it too. And so I was basically flying back from a trip with Mike to Taiwan for some manufacturing stuff we were doing. And I just told him, I was like, hey man, I think I'm just gonna quit. I'm gonna do my own thing. Like I'm just gonna quit. And so the minute I arrived back here in the Bay Area, I called the CEO and I just told him like, hey, I think I've just had a change of heart. I kind of want to pursue my own thing. And obviously he wasn't too happy about it, but I think it was probably one of the best decisions thus far for me. So I started to have an idea of what I wanted to do. I wanted to start my own company. I didn't know that I wanted to do a consultancy or a product company yet. I didn't know, but I did know that I needed some space to kind of think about that. So I basically started to freelance a little bit more just to kind of pay the bills, but then figure out what I wanted to do. So Y Studios actually hired me again to contract for them for a little bit. And during that time, a lot of things were changing at Ubiquity. Like after I had left, a lot of people started to leave as well. And one of those people that left was Mike, my partner. And he called me up and he just said like, hey, like what are you up to nowadays? Are you working for a company? Like kind of like just wondering what I was doing. And he was actually going to take a job over in LA for some vehicle stuff. And I was like, hey, actually, let's meet up for coffee and let's talk. And basically, after talking, we kind of determined that, well, this is the best chance in our lives right now. We're at the age where we could try to do something. And so we decided to start a concrete watch company. And yeah, it kind of sounded really funny just saying it, like to start a concrete watch company. It wasn't like an IoT product or anything like that, but it was something that was really, really different than the things we were working on. We had worked so long in tech that I think we just creatively like wanted an outlet. And so we decided to found this company called Aggregate. And I can open these for you guys later, but essentially we designed, the whole reason we wanted to do concrete watches was I had always collected a lot of watches before. I wore wooden watches, I wore like Nuka 3D printed watches, stuff like that. Just not super expensive stuff, but just like, well-designed stuff, Philip Stark watches, stuff like that. And I've always wanted to do my own watch brand, and my co-founder also was into watches as well. So we're like, hey, like, let's come up with something that's completely unique, because we're not necessarily fulfilling like a life-changing need, but we're fulfilling an emotional need to feel different, right? So we thought, why not reappropriate some materials to kind of like a timeless watch? And so that's what we did. So we formed Aggregate and learned a lot about e-commerce and just production in general. So up until this point, really good at industrial design. I knew ins and outs of like how to design something, but didn't know very well how to sell something. That was like a whole nother avenue, right? But eventually we figured it out. Drew, the guy I hired to do my website when I was at Ubiquity, found out that I started my own company and was like, hey, we'll help you guys, and I won't charge you a bunch either because you're my friend. And so kind of started to make network connections with a lot of these people that I had worked with in the past to kind of help me out with this vision. So yeah, this is some close-up shots of that concrete watch. We launched it on Kickstarter. Why Kickstarter? Well, no VCs in Silicon Valley would want to fund a concrete watch company. That's very silly, right, for them. So we're like, all right, well, we're in this new day and age of Kickstarter where users can kind of make the vote whether this is going to survive or not. And so within 3 days, we raised over $40,000 for it. And then by the end of the campaign, we had $63,000. It's a modest amount, but it was enough to go into production. And so we got some recognition. We started to get a lot of emails from Mashable, Uncrate, some of those blogs like Hypebeast and stuff like that. But we really, I don't know, for us, it was like when we were in GQ, that was when we were like, oh man, we're legit, right? Especially on the Kylo Ren issue, because I'm a Star Wars fan. Other brands started to find out about us. If you guys are familiar with a Bay Area brand called Adapt, they've been here for like 10 years. Pretty established local SF brand, streetwear brand. We ended up doing a collaboration with them, doing a carabiner. So the carabiner is called Radius. I'm actually wearing it. But basically, it's taking the concept of fidget toys and some of that movement and kind of mixing it with the utilitarianness of a carabiner. So kind of just a fun little experiment. And funny enough, this actually is in the second round for IDEA awards. So that's kind of exciting for this. And so you guys are probably wondering, well, like, how did all that stuff lead to Hatch Duo, right? Which is kind of like what a lot of people know us for now. And the reason was, honestly, like, I have kids, and this is my daughter, Blakely, and I have a son recently too, Nathan. And the whole reason we needed to, we kind of were accidental consultancy owners, and here's the reason why. Aggregate was going great. We had funded everything. We had paid for the production. Great, right? Like, got the watches done. But now what? Because we weren't making that much money at the time, right? We'd pay for everything. And Mike and I had moved right next to Mike, so moved into a small little apartment, and we lived right next to each other. Our office was basically our living rooms. You can kind of see it here on the right side. I didn't have like a playpen or anything. I literally threw a blanket on the floor and just like let her play there. But that's probably, like, for me, I just was like, man, like, I don't know how much longer we can kind of sustain this. I knew my wife was kind of carrying most of the load financially. And I even talked to Mike, and there was a point in time where both of us were like, man, maybe we just need to go back to work and just run Aggregate on the side because, like, we're not bringing any money. For me, that was like, that was not an option for me. I didn't want to work for anyone anymore at the time. So lucky enough, we went to a few expos and conventions, some networking things. And through one of them, I actually came across Blast from the Past, someone I had come across, in my past working days. And they were actually starting their own startup. They knew that we had started Aggregate. They wanted to know about that, so we started talking about that. Turns out they needed something done that we could do. And so that kind of became our first real client. And so we started freelancing. But it wasn't much money. We were literally making nothing. But, at least we were working, right? Here's Mike, my partner, holding my kid. So we would actually take conference calls in China for Aggregate, right, while he was holding my kid. And then we'd also take client calls and stuff like that in the living room. And yeah, like DoorDash, I spent thousands of dollars on this nice education, but I didn't want to go work for someone, so I was like, forget it. I'm going to DoorDash if I have to, if that means like I don't have to go back to work for someone. So we were supplementing freelance, DoorDashing, and while we were DoorDashing late at night, we were on calls with China to handle like manufacturing stuff with aggregate. It was pretty crazy and definitely not sustainable. And so that's, but we just stuck with it. And long story short, we stuck with it, and the clients started to get larger and larger. The projects started getting larger and larger. People heard that, oh, like we freelance too. And soon those companies became Bed Bath & Beyond, Logitech, and some others that I can't talk about now because it's not public yet. But yeah, and essentially we were like, all right, let's start another company. We already did the first one, let's start another one. And so we created Hatch Duo. So it's a full service design consultancy. It's a boutique though, right? But we focus on industrial design and as it relates to branding and the end product cycle of the engineering aspect of it. So my partner, Mike, is a mechanical engineer. I'm an industrial designer, and you kind of need both of those things in order to bring something into production. So O, who is a student here, can tell you the first office was actually my garage. It was not this, but we recently just got our office. It was a very tiny office, but it was a milestone for us because for a while we would avoid meeting clients, and we would always ask them, like when they would want to bring their team of like 9, we'd be like, actually, can we go to your office? Or if not, we would rent space at like WeWork, or we would get shared space to basically fake it, right? It was crazy, and some of those clients were like pretty big too, and so we're just fortunate enough that now we're finally at that stage where we can have an office. So it's in Sunnyvale. And here's some of the stuff that, even though aggregate was done kind of before Hatch Duo, the clients that come to us now, they like recognize that from campaigns, and so we get a lot of startups and entrepreneurs who recognize that project. And let me plug in because this thing might die. Sorry about this, guys. Awesome. Thank you. Thanks. MBA stuff, right? And one of our like pretty defining clients was a startup right here in the Bay Area in Berkeley, Robyn Healthcare. They're an IoT health startup. Basically, friend of a friend of a friend knew this really successful startup entrepreneur who had a successful exit, had a bunch of cash, started this health thing, and they needed a prototype to be made, right? So they were already talking to design firms like the ones that you've heard of here, and just didn't feel like they were the right fit because they focused just on industrial design. Luckily, I had a partner who was a mechanical engineer, and we can offer the prototype aspect of that. So they took us on, and recently they came out of stealth, and this device is actually in UCSF, I believe, and some Kaisers and here in San Francisco. They've expanded to an office in Austin as well, so we just feel really fortunate that we kind of were able to participate in their growing success. Fantana Headphones, this was a startup who came to us. They're actually not released yet, but they're fine with this because they're going to release within the next month. But essentially, we worked on some true wireless headphones for them. And then, I don't know if you guys have seen O post this, but he was actually part of the design team that worked on this project. Zoology was a kind of a health startup in San Diego. They do kind of a Keurig manual version of protein powders that you can mix with the bottle of water. And ever since we've left Ubiquity, there's a lot of, people they hop around jobs all the time. Some people start their own thing. Turns out one of the directors I used to work with at Ubiquity, worked pretty closely with him. He branched out, did his own startup as well, called Commute Guardian, and basically it's a AI smart vision bike horn to kind of prevent collisions when you're riding the bike. And so he reached out to us knowing that Mike and I started our own company. And yeah, it's kind of just crazy how like just word of mouth and just making sure you build good relationships, how that can kind of come into play later on. So here's kind of some renderings of that. Yeah, so I'm wrapping up, and I guess like the question is, you know, I'm still figuring it out right now. Like I definitely don't, I'd be lying to you guys if I told you I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm figuring it out literally like every day. I'm making a lot of mistakes. But how did I get to this point? I think for me, I've always been about, and still am, creating your own opportunities. You know, like back in that time when Whipsaw had that job posting where they're asking for 3rd and 4th years, I don't let stuff like that stop me. And I think like just don't define yourself by other people's rules, and just, you know, create your own doors and walk through them. To keep pushing past the obstacles and the heartbreaks. There's going to be a lot of those along the way, especially when you kind of carve out your own path. There's times, Mike can tell you afterwards if you guys talk to him, there was times where we wanted to just close shop and just go back to work. And even right now with aggregate, there's manufacturing problems, right? Like there's things that are out of our control. So, you know, there's definitely challenges along the way. Or like IDEO, my dream company that I really wanted to work for, going through a bunch of interviews in person, thinking I got it, and then them still saying no. But I think that kind of put me on my path of where I am right now, right? And then lastly, surround yourself with people that believe in you. I think not only do I have a really good partner in business, but my wife especially, like from day one, the minute I wanted to kind of pursue this thing, even though we were expecting a child and everything, she's like, yeah, like just do it, like I believe in you. And I think you gotta really surround yourself with peers and family and friends that will kind of help support that dream. And I think lastly, you have one fucking life, so do something about it. And that's by Gary Vaynerchuk. I follow him a lot now, especially being an entrepreneur. I don't know if you guys follow him on Instagram. He has really inspirational stuff. But I think, yeah, like if you look at it as you live every day to your last, and career-wise, your time here at Academy, it's like one chance, right? Like do what you can here, and then once your different jobs that you guys will have throughout your career, really try to make an impact. And yeah, I think that's it. If you guys want to follow me on Instagram, it's on the right. Our company's Instagram's on the right, and the left is my personal and company's websites. Yeah, thank you. Any questions? I don't know how much time we have left.
Okay. Hi, Jon. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. The one thing I like to ask is I really want to know that how you concentrated when you're engaging in the design project, because you said you was a party guy before. So I really like to know that what academies brings you to, you know, focus on something. Thank you.
Yeah. Like, what did I focus on here at school? I think like after having the first internship at NeuroSky, I kind of realized like my perspective was opened up with, wow, there's a lot of tech companies in the Bay Area. For me, what worked for me was that I wanted to stay in the Bay Area, right? Like I wanted to be near my family. So I think for me, I wanted to focus on product design and specifically consumer electronics. And so that's kind of what I started to focus on the most. I know my projects weren't necessarily like that, but I think just through the internships that I got afterwards kind of started to put me on that path. So that's what I started to focus on, yeah. And I would do side projects too, like it wouldn't just be PD1, I mean, those are the ones I showed you guys, but I would do my own projects as well, like on the side, that I would put in my portfolio as well, just to target stuff, yeah.
Okay, what what is your most rewarding or challenging experience being an entrepreneur? Because you mentioned several times how much you have struggled to wherever you are today. Mm-hmm. So what is so rewarding that you want to do it?
Man, that's a tough one. I think for me, when my wife and I were having our second child, Nathan, my son, and we kind of realized for us and the decisions we wanted to make, that small apartment next to drunk people at night was probably not going to be the best decision for our kids. And so Mike and I landing enough clients for us to be able to kind of get out of that lifestyle. So I now don't live there anymore. I'm fortunate enough to live in a better place. I have a house now, but just like the grind to get to that point was like pretty hard. So just to be able to have that option at that point, that was pretty rewarding, I would say, but really challenging to get there. And it still is. It could end tomorrow, you know, like you never know. Yeah.
How did you typically go about kind of like marketing yourself for like internships and stuff during school and right after school?
Yeah, I would go to a lot of those like networking events, you know, like Design Week, stuff like that. Definitely go to those. Talk to as many people as you can. Whenever professionals would come, I was just in the studio a lot too. So like when people would stop by and stuff, like I would try to talk to them, and I would just send my portfolio everywhere, even if they didn't have an ad or a listing or anything. I would just send it. I would go on LinkedIn and try to add like the CEO of the company, stuff like that. Yeah. Yeah. Like really annoying things probably looking back on, but I guess it worked. Yeah.
It's for the recording.
Hey Mark.
It's for the recording.
Hi, John.
Hey.
So what is Jon Thai as a brand, and what is next?
Jon Thai, that's a good question. I think Jon Thai as a brand is an aggregate of my experiences to kind of set me up for that next phase. In terms of what is next, in the most immediacy, building out the consultancy with my partner Mike, building out aggregate and scaling that. But in terms of like what's next, I don't know. Like if you ask me if I could imagine, you know, us doing what we're doing right now, like 2-3 years ago, I wouldn't. But the only thing we envisioned was launching something on Kickstarter. That was as far as like we really looked. But I think as a brand, like I really try to. I'm definitely not the best at everything. I know where my weaknesses are, but I like to kind of collab with people that can supplement that. So you'll notice like I pulled in my friend who does digital design stuff. I partnered with a mechanical engineer to help with production stuff. So I think moving forward, we do have a lot of collabs baking for aggregate with different brands, YouTube celebs and stuff like that. And then on the consultancy side, we're definitely kind of like working on collaboration. So I think like in a sense, aggregate is the definition is bringing things together, right? And I think that philosophy kind of carries through with how we like to work as well. Yeah.
Hey, John.
Hey.
So what would you say, what's your advice to our students in terms of what should they focus on to be able to land that first internship or job? What would you recommend for them to highlight? In other words, what would you recommend as the one person hiring?
Yeah.
What's the secret? What are you looking for?
I think that's a good question. I think what we specifically at Hatch Duo, what we look for is obviously like solid foundational skills, right? Like the ability to sketch, CAD, model make, you know, rapidly think, ideation, all that kind of stuff. The stuff that you guys are learning in school. that stuff should be solid. Like there shouldn't be any question about that. Where we expect probably, you guys not to have as much experience in is design and aesthetics, because obviously that takes time and proportions and stuff like that. But I think if you guys can find out ways to stand out and really show what you're passionate about. So for instance, for me, like I was into the EEG head stuff, right? So I focused purely on that, and I think that caught the attention of like the alumni who, specifically it was targeted for. And I think all internships are different. Like for what we're looking for, maybe Whipsaw is looking for something else, right? So I think like really start to target who you really want to work for. Look at, what they're putting out. Think of what you offer in terms of value. So for instance, one of the interns that works for us right now, who's sitting here, what we really liked about him, like he could sketch, he could do a lot of stuff that some of the other people that we've interviewed can do, but he could animate really well, and he knows programs, different programs that traditionally maybe like industrial design students don't necessarily focus on. So not saying like learn every single program, but if you can do it really well to the point where you can add value to the place that's trying to hire you, I would say that's what you should focus on. And try to talk to them too. So if there's a place that you want to work, for IDEO, that was like my dream job for the longest time. I would try to network with the designers there, have lunch with them, take them to coffee, and just talk to them and just ask them, so what are you guys looking for? Like I wasn't asking them for a job. I was just asking like, how should I make my portfolio so when it's ready, like that you guys will interview me, stuff like that.
That's a great point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, John. I have a question that in terms of manufacturing process, how do you protect your design in terms of not being copied,
Good
by
question.
any other?
One of my partners for Aggregate is a lawyer, so that's one way. But to the longer part of that answer is definitely like you're gonna have to probably consult like a legal team or something like that so they can really get you the proper documents, because especially when you manufacture overseas, the laws are a little bit different. It's a little bit tougher to protect. Luckily enough, design-wise, you can protect it too, right? So aside, you're not going to stop someone from copying you once you become really successful, but the way in which you make your design, if you can make that pretty difficult for someone to replicate, like concrete, there's no one that is going to replicate the way we do it, because we're like Batman, right? Like we do some stuff over here, we'll do some stuff here in America, and we'll do some stuff overseas so that none of them really know how to put it all together. I'm fortunate enough that my partner is really good about that, so we kind of have secret recipes and stuff like that we kind of keep pretty close to the chest. Yeah. Yeah. But it is really hard. It is really hard. Yeah.
Hi, boss. So since you're also from AAU, you're the alumni, and what are your thoughts that is the advantage that we can take as a student from AAU, and what are the suggestions from those advantages?
So I think as a design school, you guys have one of the best facilities and access to like top of the line like software, basically all the tools that even as a consultancy, us being a startup, we don't even have the best 3D printers or anything like that. So really try to utilize and take advantage of using these tools for your projects. But more importantly, take advantage of the access to the professional teachers that you have and their classmates. Like, I think the best asset I had while here at Academy of Art was my classmates, competing against them in a friendly way, right? We were really competitive. Like, basically every time we would enter a class, we would just try to top each other in the friendly, so we'd help each other too. But a lot of those people that I was most competitive with in school, they're like my friends now. Some of them work with me, some of them refer work to me, and vice versa. And so you'll remember basically like the best of your class, and when you guys start working, you'll be able to, utilize that as well. So just work really hard. Like work harder than you're working right now. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, guys.